You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the 95 Podcast. This is Dale Sellers, Executive Director of 95 Network. Hope you're having a great summer. We're recording this in the summer, so I hope you've had a good summer. And as I mentioned recently, I hope you've taken some time off to replenish and get yourself built back up. There's a lot of challenges that are facing us, and today's guest is going to help us, I think, in a big way deal with some of those challenges. I have with me today Justin Knapp. Justin's in Texas, right outside of Dallas, hanging out on the lake. How you doing today, Justin?
Doing good, doing really good. Yeah. Trying to survive this Texas heat. The lake makes it a little bit easier, but it's sure something to get through.
I tell you what, man, you guys, I was in Texas a couple summers ago in July, and I'm going, I can't breathe down here.
It's something else, man. It is something else. I love it. I love the heat. I definitely love being real close to the lakes and everything. But like I said, when we were talking before the episode, I was in Colorado Springs for the past 14 years. So you forget a little bit about the Texas bite when you get back down here.
Guarantee you do. Well, take a few minutes and let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us your story.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And, when I heard what you were doing, actually, one of our friends, Jason Allison, is who connected us. And when he told me what you were doing, I was like, man, that is 100% right up our tree and what we're trying to do. So, man, really excited to spend a little time with you. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
So talk about your family, your background a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So don't come from any sort of, Christian upbringing or any of that. I come from a family of really, really awesome folks, but they are as wild as it gets. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that, really young parents in just a very wild family. And so we had all the stuff that you hear people get up and give testimonies about. That's my story. We had a really, really wild upbringing. So again,
okay,
no Christian.
I'm too curious. What do you mean wild upbringing?
Like if my dad is going to have a get together and all my uncles that are, none of them are actually related to us, but I've got like 35 uncles that I've just grown up calling uncle this or uncle that. And when they get together, we'll go out to the lake and they've all got big, beer bellies and prison tattoos, and they're talking one of us into fighting another one or jumping off of something or racing something real fast, or, we didn't get celebrated for good grades or whatever. It was like,
wow.
How many touchdowns did you score? Did you win the fight? And that's us. And so again, they're not bad people. They're fantastic. They're hilarious, good. I grew up in a really loving home, but they're crazy. They're absolutely nuts, and
I think probably most of us would say our families are.
Amen. Yeah. So mine's really fun, like that's the best thing I can say. But all that, we did not have any sort of, Christian upbringing or any of that. I had an aunt or two aunts, I should say. One that found the Lord when I was, in 10 or 11, and she would always try to take us to these little churches whenever she would go. And then I had another aunt that lived in Oklahoma that had a little bit of a Christian background, but that just really wasn't our thing. I ended up having an experience with the Lord when I was 14. Didn't even know what it was. I didn't know what being saved was. I'd never been to church, or not really anyways, not enough to learn salvation or any of that kind of stuff. But I had a genuine encounter where I committed myself to the Lord when I was 14. That started changing a lot of stuff. Again, I had no idea really what was going on. I just knew that the Creator, God, was really kind of speaking to me. And then when I was about 16, I started dating this girl, and her dad was like, if you're going to date my daughter, you have to come to church with us. And so that's when I found out what being saved was and salvation and all this stuff. And I actually kind of discovered what my, experience was when I was 14, where it was really just me committing my life to the Lord and, saying that I was going to go where he wanted me to go and do what he wanted me to do. And
dive into that a little bit. What happened there? Yeah, that's a cool story.
It is a cool story. So, again, I don't have any sort of church background at this point in time. When I was 13, I ended up getting connected to this guy who was a big time drug supplier to North Texas. He got the first access to things when they would come in from Houston, he would get kind of the first batch of everything. He was a really young guy too. He was in his 20s. I had just kind of showed that I was a lot, older than I really was. And so I would, sell little, dime bags and stuff to my friends. And it sounded a lot cooler back when when I was doing it than it is, it wasn't that big of a operation, but because of that, and because of, the quality of the stuff that this guy had, I've always been a good networker. I've always had a lot of favor, I tell people. So I ended up, selling these little dime bags and pills and stuff to all these little people in my community. And it ended up that I was, selling stuff to the guys that worked at the 7-Eleven and, all these other kinds of things. So, man, by the time I was 14, I could walk into a 7-Eleven and, buy beer and all kinds of stuff and just, walk right out. I mean, so of course, to my friends in the 8th grade, they think I am the coolest thing, the coolest guy on earth, man.
Yeah.
And, a lot of that was just because my family was so crazy, like I wouldn't even have gotten in trouble for any of this. You know what I mean? Like they would have been like, you need to calm down, but it wouldn't have been on the back end. They would have kind of been like, dang, dude, that boy, he's really got it going on.
I'm so proud of you, son.
Yeah. And I don't mean to say that, my family would have been like, hey, we're proud of what you're doing by any means, but also I wouldn't have been in that much trouble either. And so, I have this and don't, just kind of imagine a 14-year-old that's living that way. I mean, I was as arrogant and at the same time, I'm really good at sports. I'm in Texas and I'm great. I'm a really good football player. I'm a good athlete. I'm making passable grades and my teachers liked me and stuff. So I'm not really being a bad kid other than I'm doing everything that bad kids do. And, selling drugs and doing underage, whatever else.
I'd probably disagree with you and say you were a bad kid.
I was being a pretty bad kid.
On that point,
But I didn't have this attitude where I was like, let's go and set the world on fire, any of that. It was just like, man, I kind of walked through these doors that were open to me and it was fun. But then this new shipment of stuff came in. It was called California Mist. I'll never forget it. And it was this weed that had come in from Houston, and it was like, it was the golden ticket. Everybody wanted this stuff. And so it was kind of a big deal at the time. And so I had a friend of mine who had a mother that was, she had kids later on in life. So she was really like our grandmother's age. My buddy's older brother was in his mid-20s. And again, we were 13 or 14. So they had an extra room at their house. And because his mom was older, I mean, we could just kind of do whatever we wanted to do. They had a pool. And so we would go out and be all kinds of crazy. And then, I would come back and just crash at their house. We'd eat all the food in their house, and they had this big, huge mirror up above their fireplace. And one night, it was after all this California Mist craziness. We had like a little stack of money. And, when you're 14, that makes you feel like you're the coolest person on earth. And, it was just kind of, it was weird because it was kind of at this like height, it was a good moment. It wasn't like a bad time or any of that kind of stuff. And when we would get stoned, we would always go up and look at our faces in the mirror. They had this big mirror up above his fireplace, and we'd laugh and giggle and, whatever. And one day I did that, and I like looked at myself and I felt like somebody kind of spoke to me. Like it was like I felt kind of like somebody was talking to me out of my stomach is the best way I could say it. And it was just like a real simple, like, what are you doing? And not in any way like what are you doing? Like,
sure,
you're in trouble or something. It was more like if, my oldest son were to run in our kitchen with his underwear on his head and start running around in circles, I'd be like, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
And that's exactly what it was like. And, I felt like I, pretty much completely sobered up. My buddy was like, what is wrong with you? I talked to him about this a couple of years back and he totally remembers when this happened, and that night I went into his older brother's room and I fell asleep and I had this dream, and all I can say about the dream is I just felt at peace. Like I felt like a big weight had been taken off my chest, and I'd never felt anything like that before. And so I prayed this little bitty prayer, like, God, I think you're trying to talk to me, and if you are, I'll do what you want me to do, and I'll go where you want me to go. And it was just that simple. And I didn't know, what had happened or any of that. And then years, and I started changing. Like after that, I stopped doing all that craziness with that guy. And it wasn't because anything bad happened. It was more just like I just didn't want to do it anymore. And I gradually stopped doing drugs, and, all I was doing was smoking weed. So I wasn't, doing anything hard, but I stopped smoking weed, and, I wasn't partying as much, and I was more focused on football and, trying to find better friends. And it all happened like really organically, but the starting point was definitely when I had that encounter. And then from there, I started dating this girl in high school with, probably the worst of intentions, just another, girlfriend or whatever. And her dad was just this awesome, devout Christian guy. And he started, he'd drive like 45 minutes to pick me up and take me to church every Sunday. And he was just a great guy, and taught me about, construction and working and all this stuff. And of course, he started talking to me about his story and his testimony in the Lord and all this. And one Sunday they gave an altar call, and I just raised my hand. I was like, yeah, I want to know, more about this. Or I looked up at him, or, whatever it was. And so the pastor took me out, and with this, this girl I was dating's dad, they took me out and they told me what salvation was, that it was, that you believe in your heart, confess with your mouth, and, all of that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, that's what happened to me when I was 14. I said, I believe you're real. And I said, I want to, it was kind of this weird backwards thing where I found out that, I had given my life to the Lord when I was 14, kind of, retroactively. Yeah. And then from there, kind of just, carrying on into the story, when I was my senior year of high school, crazy story stuff, but my mom had to have help with the bills and stuff. So I always had a job. I always had, something that I was doing to make money pretty much my whole life. But my senior year, I got a full-time job. As soon as football season was over, I went and got a full-time job working at a grocery store called Whole Foods. And it was awesome, man. I felt like a grown-up. I was working overtime and had, I was paying the bills in my house and everything. And the Lord was just really working on me. I could just, feel it. And I ended up connecting with two guys. I mean, there's a bunch of people, but there were two guys that the Lord really clearly directed me to. One was a guy named Willie Reddick, who has since passed, but he was a retired pastor, and he worked in my department. And so he just kind of started in his own way, sort of discipling me and talking to me about what I was feeling, this call that I was feeling, and this stuff that was really kind of breeding confusion was really the Lord speaking to me about my call, and that he had plans for me. And that's what he had been working on. He kind of started unpacking that for me. And there was another guy that worked in our cheese department. And this dude was always all fired up, and he was this, big devout Christian. And what ended up happening, and this is, kind of a crazy story, but what ended up happening was the girl I was dating, her and I, she was, a very sheltered girl, and she was really looking for somebody to go and rebel with. And I was like the perfect guy to go do that with. I was actually on the other path though. So we kind of found ourselves at this weird intersection. Right. And so when the Lord really started working on me, I respected her dad so much that one day I just told her, like, hey, I'm not going to keep anything secret from your dad. I want to come clean and just tell him everything that we've done, any partying that we've done or anything that we've done to mess around or any of that. I'm just going to come clean about all this. And I want you to know that I'm going to do this because obviously I'm about to go rat you out. It's basically what it was going to be. And her dad kind of organically sparked up a conversation with her. And so she knew that I was about to, go say all this stuff. So she didn't want to lie to him. And when she did that, he lost it. And he didn't initially, but he got really upset afterwards. And he told her that he was calling the pastor to the house, and that she was going to have to confess everything to the pastor as well. That if she didn't, they were going to pack her bags and she was going to have to leave the house. And the pastor showed up, and she didn't want to sit down with this guy that she had known her whole life and say all this stuff. So the pastor and her parents packed her bags. I was at a work event. So I was I was out playing paintball with my work team, and I come back home and she's there. And I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I have to stay here. And I'm like, no, you don't. Cause I'm like on this whole other, I'm not having some girl stay in my house, And her parents had kind of, kicked her out and just said, if you don't want to do what we're telling you to do, then go live with this boy. But I didn't want her to be there, And so now in the crazy 18-year-old place I thought this was the Lord, just telling me, well, she's your deal now. This is falling in your plate. You've got to figure out how to marry her and take care of her and all this stuff. And I was just like, God, man, is this real? And I felt like it was something the Lord was doing. So, and I don't have a ton of, you gotta imagine how things are going
Yeah,
at
you have
this
no
church
point
that
of
I've been.
reference. Mm-hmm.
Well, and now, the only people that I do know is this church that I'd been going to with this family.
Yeah.
But now all this has come out. So the church doesn't think, that much of me either at this
Yeah.
point, and so there wasn't really a pastor that I could go to. I could talk to some of the people at work, but I really didn't know. And I just felt super confused. And so one day I'm at my job, and the guy that worked in the cheese department that had really become kind of a brother to me, or a mentor or whatever, he comes walking up to me and he's like, "Man, you just look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, man. What is going on?" And I was like, "Man, this, I just feel like the Lord's calling me into some stuff and I don't know how to handle it." And he goes, "I think so too. I think the Lord has a call on your life, but you need some training."
Yeah.
And I started laughing hysterically, because you got to imagine, I don't know that there is a such thing as like a place where you go get training on God. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I start laughing, and he's looking at me, and I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "There's a school." And then when he says there's a school, I really start laughing, because now I'm thinking like some, mountaintop
Yeah.
Jedi
A
school or
monastery.
something.
Yeah.
And I'm laughing, especially for me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like for me to go back to tell my family that I'm going to some weird, there was just no way.
Yeah.
And he goes, "No, I'm serious. There's a school. It's in Colorado Springs where people go to find out their destiny and their call and all of this kind of stuff." And so I end up looking it up. It was a place, many of you probably heard of it. It was called Charis Bible College.
Mm-hmm.
It's connected to Andrew Womack Ministries.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that it was the only Bible college in the world. I didn't know that they existed. And I mean, that's hands down 100% the truth. And so I tell the guy, I'm like, "Man, I mean, that would be cool. But, the car I was driving was like a 92 Chevy Cavalier that when you put it in gear, it sounded like somebody hit the engine with a hammer. It had cracks all through the windshield. It was a black car, and the AC didn't work. We're in Texas. If you turn the AC on, the engine would start smoking. We had different sized tires." I mean, I was like, I don't have a car that could get me to Colorado to go to this college. And on top of that, I'm paying all the bills for my mom. The only way that I'm going to go to school is if I get some kind of scholarship. There's absolutely no way this can happen. But it really stuck with me. And so, that whole thing passes. The girl's family allows her to move back in. And that was actually kind of my, like, we're done.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on here, but that was too much. I'm out of here. And then because like when I broke up with that girl, it was almost like I kind of had this weird, like, hyper focus of like, okay, thank God that wasn't it, but the Lord is doing something. And so from there, I just kept praying about this school.
Yeah.
And so every night I would just pray, God, and I couldn't tell anybody because, my pastors that were at the church, I'm not on the best terms with them.
Yeah.
I called one of them and spoke to him about this. And he was like, "Justin, I'm just going to be honest with you, man. I really don't think ministry's for you." And at the time, I know that sounds crazy, but at the time I would have said the same thing.
Sure.
I mean, I was as wild as it gets,
Mm-hmm.
And then, my mom, if I would have told her that I was thinking about going, or my mom or my brother, if I'm thinking about going to Colorado, she would have freaked out. Like, how are we going to pay the bills? And, all of those kind of things. And, all of my friends who I hadn't even really been around because I've been working so much would have been like, "You're doing what? You're going to go do what?" So I just felt kind of isolated. I felt like there wasn't really anybody that I could talk to about it. And so every night I just started praying, "God, how am I going to get there? How am I going to pay for it?" And it was kind of just the same prayer. And then one day I was walking into my Spanish classroom in high school, and my Spanish teacher stops me. Love this woman to death. Her name's Miss Thompson now. It was Miss David at the time. But man, this woman changed everything about my life. And she stopped me and she just said, "Justin, I always have really weird dreams, like monkeys hanging from the ceiling at the mall. And so I usually just disregard dreams. But for the past 4 nights, I've had the exact same dream, and it's been about you. And in the dream, you're in this corner and you're praying and you're saying, 'How am I going to get there? How am I going to pay for it? How am I going to go?' And in the dream, I'm standing behind you and I'm screaming, 'Just go and everything will be okay. Just go and everything will be okay.'" And so she tells me this.
Wow.
And my jaw, because nobody knew. Nobody. The guy that told me about the school, I laughed in his face for 15 minutes. So he doesn't think that I'm interested in going off to the only Bible college in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I was just like, man, I'm supposed to go. And so I started telling some people that I'm going. I didn't even know how to pronounce it. I was calling it Charis, and I was like, I'm going to Charis Bible College in Colorado Springs. And everybody's like, what are you talking about, man? I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but that's where I'm going to go. And this is 2008. So there was a hiring freeze. So the store in Colorado Springs, I couldn't transfer. They were like, we haven't hired anybody in 8 months. Like, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And then, of course, because we were going to a Bible college, a lot of the FAFSA and a lot of the other kind of stuff that you can typically do, that didn't apply to me in this case. And it does now, I think. But when I went there, it didn't. So I was just like, man, I'm going. I don't know how we're going to do it. Didn't have a car, didn't have anything. And then a couple weeks before this was all supposed to go down, my aunt up in Oklahoma, they have a really successful company. She calls me and she's like, hey, come up here. Maybe we can co-sign on a loan for you or something and figure it out. I go up there and my uncle does not like me. I'm not his favorite nephew by any means. And he tells my aunt, we're going to buy him a car and we're going to pay for him to go to school. And I was like, so they take me out, buy me a new car. I had this awesome little sports car that they bought me, paid in cash. And then they paid for the entire time that I went to school and paid my insurance and phone bill the entire time I was there. And that came out of nowhere. Well, while I was there buying that car, I get a phone call from Whole Foods and they tell me that they had just had the person that had my position just quit. And they were like, how quickly can you step right in? And I was like, I'll be there in a week and a half. And so I was able to get a raise, get a new car, and get all of my school paid for like a couple weeks before we got there. And then once we actually got out to Colorado, like once I actually, got there, my mom had a friend who was the regional vice president of Whole Foods, and she was moving houses. And she wanted, I didn't know people did this, but she wanted all new furniture for her new house. And she was going to get rid of all the previous furniture or sell it along with the house or whatever. So I ended up with $30,000 of designer furniture in my $430 a month studio apartment. I had 4-post king size bed with like wooden post and a matching bedroom suit and living room suit. It was nuts, man. So now I've got this sports car. I've got this, and continuing kind of right on with the story, I get to Karis again, don't know anything. I mean, I don't know. The first couple, weeks I was out there, the guy at the front would be like, all right, everybody turn to Matthew chapter 5. And I would have to go to the table of contents, find where everything was. And so my buddies that, had grown up in Sunday school or whatever, they would turn and open their stuff and then turn and open my stuff because it was faster than me trying to find it. I just did not know anything, guys. And a couple weeks in, there was a professor that got up on stage. His name was Dan Funkhauser. Dan was a business guy, entrepreneur, church planter, had been really successful in business, had a multi-million-dollar company before he was 30, gave it all up, started planting churches, planted 2 churches that went from 0 to, almost 1,000 members, multi-million-dollar facilities, debt-free, did it all without a denomination or network backing. Had just some really, really cool churches. And the first time I heard him speak, I was like, man, I want to learn from this guy, like something really connected.
Yeah.
It turned out that he told me that he was going to be starting his last church, like his final church. He was 65. And he was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to plant this last church. And my only intention is just to pour out everything that I've learned in all my years of ministry. And so I go up to him and I'm just like, man, I really feel like I'm supposed to help you get this thing going. And he's like, I do too. And he's like, Justin, I see the church planter entrepreneur thing all over you. So we're going to do this way differently. I'm not going to pay you. I'm not going to promote you. I'm not going to give you anything, but I'm going to let you use this part of my building. And I want you to start your own thing. And I'm going to coach you all along the way. And so it was a really unique thing. I mean, he made me figure out how to believe for sound systems and chairs and how to start something from nothing. Like, you want to have a service? Cool. This is, go do it. And how do I do it? Figure it out. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's what we did. And we did that for 6 years. I have some crazy stories, along that process. And it was amazing. And that first 6 years, sharing space with Dan and growing our church, we grew this awesome little church, probably, a couple hundred people. And, anywhere from, all 200 of them would show up on a Saturday night or, 25 of them would show up on a Saturday night. And it was crazy people. I mean, we had people come in and drunk pee on our couch. We had somebody try to spark up a joint in the back before.
At church.
Whenever vaping became a thing, man, people would be vaping, and we'd have the lights off so we couldn't tell that you turn it on. It looked like there was a glory cloud.
Well,
And it
you
was.
had a built-in hazer. So let's do
We
this.
did,
I
yeah.
want to take a short break, and when we come back, this is a good segue into what you're doing, why we had you on. I wanted people to know your background just to understand how God uses what you're doing now to really impact. So let's take a short break. We'll be right back. I'm back here with Justin. Just have listened to a fascinating story of what the Lord can do in your life. And so, Justin, you're now working at the church, and you have your own church inside a church. I think is what I heard you say. So
Pretty much, yeah.
So tell us about that, and then let's transition to talk about a little bit about what you're doing now and what you can help other churches with.
Absolutely. And so what really ended up happening is we grow this church, probably 200 people, absolutely crazy folks coming in, a lot of young people, people that were just trying to get their life together, just getting started in their careers, just getting started with families. Or we had a massive amount of de-churched people that had grown up in the church.
Used to go.
Exactly. We're in Colorado Springs. So, I mean, there's, I think, per capita, more churches than anywhere else in the nation. So it was hard to find somebody that didn't know the 10 Commandments or didn't go to Sunday school. So we had this really strong group of people, but it was crazy. I mean, it was kind of wild. And I got done with business school, and my mentor, about a week after I graduated, my mentor is like, "Hey, let's get together." And I don't know what it is about, older boomer pastors liking to have meetings at 5 o'clock in the morning, but that's how we always did it. So 5 a.m. at a breakfast place, we're drinking coffee, and my mentor, Dan, just starts kind of laughing. And when he would do that, that was never a good thing. That always meant that he was about to tell me to do something that I did not want to do. And so he said, "Hey, I've got a plan for you. You've got 3 months to get out of my building." And he was like, "I've taught you everything I can teach you. At this point, you need to go figure it out. So no, we're going to help you get into your new building. It was in 3 months, you need to be out of my space and you need to have your own." And so that was really where a lot of the Space Together journey kind of begins, because I had this really strong church and I knew how vital we were to them and to that community. I knew that we were addressing a huge need in our community. I loved what we were doing. I was hyper passionate. I knew I was called to it. I've been working on it for all this time. And so we had all of this energy and we had a lot of momentum, but we didn't have very much cash. I had a bunch of people that would have given me their shirt or would have given me their couch, but there wasn't a lot of them that could just say, "Hey, we're going to give you enough money to, keep everything floating." So I had already gone through 2 building projects with my mentor in the church planning process. So I already knew kind of what was going to happen. It was going to be a bunch of C and B class real estate in terrible parts of town that were not designed, buildings that were not designed to be churches. It was going to be a bunch of realtors that did not want to work with us. If we did end up finding a building, we were going to have to sign a huge personally guaranteed lease that escalated in price over time. And then we were going to have to raise money to remodel the building with a bunch of people that had no idea how to remodel buildings. And we were going to have to do all of that while we were still having services. And because I'd already gone through that process a couple of times, for one, I didn't want to do it. But 2, I had been renting from my mentor the entire time.
Yeah.
So I knew that I did not need my own building to do what we were doing and be really effective. So good millennial, I pull out my preaching iPad. I don't even own a laptop at the time. And I'm like, there's got to be a commercial Airbnb. And so with that, I'm 35 pages deep in Google searches trying to find how people share their commercial buildings. And I couldn't find it. I found all kinds of ways to share an office or a one-time event center or a warehouse, but there was no way for me to partner with people in my local community, plant roots, and grow the organization. So we had to go the traditional route, and it was exactly what I thought it was going to be. It was a bunch of B and C class real estate in terrible parts of town that was not designed to be churches. And then once we finally found this building, we had to sign this huge personally guaranteed lease that escalated in price over time. And then we had to raise a ton of money to remodel the building with a bunch of people that had no idea how to remodel buildings. And after we had gone through all the realtors and buildings and leases and remodeling and fundraising, we were never there. 2 services, band practice, youth group, and the rest of the time, this building that was 90% of my budget and all of my stress was a really expensive storage unit.
Yep.
And that's when we said, there's got to be somebody in our community that's like us that needs 10 hours a week to do what they're doing. And so again, I pull out my preaching iPad, and again, I'm 35 pages deep in Google searches trying to find how people share their commercial buildings. And again, I can't find anything. So we took really good pictures of our space with our cell phones, with our iPhones. And then we posted it to the only platform that would allow us to do so at the time, which was Craigslist. And I'm sure as I say that, all the sketchy bells are going off on everybody, and they should, because Craigslist is massively sketchy. There was a lot of things that we had to figure out in terms of how to vet people and what type of agreements we needed to have. And do people need to have certain types of insurances, and how do we cover ourselves, and check in and check out, and all of these other things that go into actually sharing your space. But we were able to figure that out. And within 3 months, we had 65% of our overhead covered by people using our facility when we weren't there. And so at the beginning of this new launch and this new plant, we had well over half of our overhead covered for the next 2 years going into the project. And then on top of that, not only was it a tremendous financial benefit, but on the other side of this, we had this massive impact in our community.
Yeah.
Where all of these nonprofits and churches and businesses and homework help for teens and all these other things that did not exist or exist in a much smaller, condensed version had this opportunity to grow into what they were trying to become. And so by opening up our building, we were having this expedited or exponential amount of impact. And it really kind of turned our little group, which was just a service that you could come to, just a place where you could come and know God, into this place where you could actually take your dream and start or sustain it in the facility that we had stewardship over. And so it allowed us to take all the resources that we had and literally plant them into our community in a more powerful way.
Did you own that building? Were you leasing this building, or did you buy this building?
We were leasing the building. We had the master lease.
So you're leasing the building you're leasing, is what I hear you say.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. I want to make sure I understood that. Mm-hmm.
And so, this is just to, anybody that's already doing this, or anybody that's listening that's interested in doing this. The way that we did this is we were using Rocket Lawyer, and we were creating some subleases. If you don't own your building, the first thing that you've got to do is you need to get a permission to sublease.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's if you want to use a sublease. It's a half a page document. It's basically just saying, hey, look, I'm not using this building to the full capacity. I would like to, continue using the building. Is it okay if I share my time with somebody else? Now, I'm going to follow that up with never, ever sign a sublease with anyone, ever. And, we learned this a little bit the hard way, but the truth is if the reason that a lot of owners don't like you signing a sublease with a prospective tenant is because you are giving legal possession of that building to the person you sign that contract with. Mm-hmm. Possession. So the same way that you have a lease from the owner for everything that's inside that facility, now the sublease owner, in the outline time that they have it, they also have possession of this building. So why does that matter? Well, let's say that somebody comes in and they say, hey, we want to rent these 2 offices for the next 6 months on Mondays from 8 to 12. And you guys say, that's perfect. We don't use these offices on Mondays. It's only 8 hours a week, man. Let's make this happen, right? So they come in and you sign a sublease with them. And then the very first Monday, they do a goat sacrifice in that office. And you're like, wait a minute, that's not what you told us you were going to do. You said you were going to be doing meetings. This is obviously not what we want you to do. You guys can't use the space anymore. If you sign a sublease with somebody, you have to go through a formal eviction process. You have to contact the sheriff's office, and the sheriff has to come and put an eviction notice on your front door. And they also have to put an eviction notice on the door that they had access to and had the lease on. And then after you go through that whole process, that sticker has to stay there for something like 60 to 90 days, I believe, to give that notice.
That's really good for churches.
Exactly. While you're operating your facility. And then on top of that, the sheriff isn't going to go in there with a gun and say, you guys got to get out of here. You still have to get them out of the building.
Yeah.
Right? Through whatever means you're going to do. And that's because you've given them legal possession of that facility. We figured out that there's a much easier way of doing this where you stay in control, and it's a license agreement that anybody that wants to know more about this can reach out to us at info@spacetogether.com. We'll provide you with this license agreement. But essentially, the license agreement is legal permission based on a whole list of rules and contingencies. And so a little bit of free stuff there. Just don't sign subleases with people if you don't have to. So we had this whole thing going on for us, and we were getting people signed up, and we had these people on contracts for a couple of years. And that was really when we started saying, like, okay, that was hard, but that wasn't that hard. In 1 quarter, we were able to reduce our overhead by 65%. I just got out of business school. I knew that if in a year you reduce your overhead by 5%, that is massive. Mm-hmm. Much 10% over a calendar year. And so in 1 quarter, to be able to do that by 65%, and it was in a way that took nothing away from our impact and our mission and what we were trying to do, it only amplified. It was kind of the first time that we saw that, like, you can open up an apple and you can count how many seeds are in the apple, but you can't take one of those seeds out and tell me how many apples are in that seed. And it was basically just us taking the resources that we had and offering it to people that had a lot of the same needs in our community. And it just amplified everything that we were trying to do. It gave us a much bigger footprint. And we did all of this in a way where it was helping us do what we wanted to do.
Sure.
You know, we didn't, and it changed our culture so dramatically. And after we were kind of on the back end of that, I was like, okay, somebody has got to be doing this. There's no way that there's nobody out there making this happen.
We've been having this conversation for years and going, hey, look, your building sits empty all week long, you know, and part of the reason I'm having you on is just simply because I'm not sure moving, you know, forward, and I'm not putting a time limit on, but I'm not sure that a lot of churches are going to be sustainable just off donations or tithing moving forward. I mean, tithing has never been real strong in most churches anyway. And so, you know, if you have a facility already, I mean, you know, a lot of churches have facility and it just sits all week long. And
right.
And so that's why I wanted you to kind of talk about how this is all happening. So all this is happening. What's the next thing that unveils, or as you begin to figure out nobody else is doing this?
So we go in and we said, you know, we knew that churches had this problem, but I was also pretty certain that it was kind of a small market, you know, for churches.
Yeah.
And so to launch an entire platform just around serving the church market. Plus, I knew that the people that would be using the churches would typically probably not just be pastors, you know. So we did a big user survey. We interviewed 1,000 people across the nation. And like I said, I knew churches had this problem, but I had also done some like MMA and combat training and things. So I knew that gyms had this problem too. I had worked with a gym really closely and coached. And so I knew that they had the exact same problem in kind of a different way. So we interviewed these people that were in churches, nonprofits, gyms, all sorts of fitness industries, studios, the culinary space, commercial kitchens, catering companies, medical facilities, charter schools. And we found that 85% of everybody that we spoke to was either already sharing space with somebody or they wanted to, but they were freaked out by Craigslist and they didn't know how to properly do these things. And we found out that a lot of it really centered around people wanted to verify who people were. They wanted to be able to securely communicate with them, and they didn't want to chase people around for payments. And so essentially we just said, we've got to at least give this a try. So that was April of 2017 that we got started. The first year was literally me going around Colorado Springs with an iPad, knocking on people's door like, hey, would you like to share your space with the community? And in that first year, I think we grew to about 78 spaces total, and started doing our initial MVP. In 2018, we raised our first round of traditional funding. We did our pre-seed. We raised $500,000. And that was really whenever we started moving. We started really doing a lot of upgrades to our tech. And since that time, we've now grown to have properties in over 30 states. We have a cumulative user base of over 50,000 users, and people that have shared space on our platform have received over $92 million in rental applications with a 32% acceptance rate across the historical time of the company. And so it turns out that a lot of people did have that same need, and did have a lot of the same demand. And so kind of on both sides of the platform, essentially what we do is we say to a facility that wants to share their space, don't tell us you have a church. Don't tell us you have a gym. Don't tell us you have an office. Tell us what your building can do. What is the functionality of your space? What amenities do you have? What is your layout? What is your area? What is the general demand in your industry or in your area? And then from there, we take the actual functionality of the space. So not that it's a church building, not that it's a gym, not that it's a dance studio. We take what that building can actually do. And then on the other side of the platform, when renters come in, they're not telling us I need a gym or I need a studio or I need a church. They tell us the exact amenities that they need, what their budget is, their intended use for the space. They go for our verification process. And then we have a matchmaking algorithm that matches people based on their availability, their budget, their location, and then their intended use for the space. And then from there, we kind of put the providers in the driver's seat with our really, really simple software. Makes it simple to agree to people, to meet people, to give virtual tours, to give in-person tours. We just handle everything in between that makes the whole process really simple and safe.
You do it all over the country?
We have properties in 30 states. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I want to ask you two questions, and they're going to be opposite. First of all, tell me a situation where specifically of a church who's gone through this process with you, a success story. Anything pop to mind?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. There's been a ton. Let me think. So there's two stories that I really love, and I've shared these a couple times before. One was actually a story from us. So this was actually one of our experiences. But there was a Romanian church, and it turned out that there was a pretty significant Romanian community in Colorado Springs.
Mm-hmm.
And so we opened up our building, and this Romanian couple come and they start sharing space with us. They tell us what it is that they're going to do. And man, it was absolutely awesome. It was one of the coolest experiences that we'd have. So they would go in and they would do worship. Like they had their own kind of worship service. And while that was going on, we had this big 25-foot table out in the cafe, and they would start putting out all of these like crazy meals and different entrees and all this stuff. And after they got done with worship, they would come back out and they would then share this meal together and celebrate and give testimonies and all these things. And it was awesome. And after, about 6 months of doing this, a year of doing this, something, they came up to us and they were just like, hey, we want you to know that we would not have been able to do this if you would not have opened up your space. We wouldn't have been able to serve this entire community if you guys wouldn't have opened up your doors. And then right after that, the pastor was like, we tried this a bunch of times, but many other pastors had a problem with me being both pastor and bounty hunter. Mm-hmm. And so hilarious, so that testimony was always really, really cool. And then we had some guys out in Arizona. It was a younger group of pastors. They signed up on the platform, and this doesn't happen for everybody. I don't want to make it seem like our software is a miracle working service. All we do is match, the functional space to the functional needs of a community. But these guys out in Arizona timed it really right. They had a really, really cool building. And within the first couple months of them sharing space, they had a ton of people coming in and using their facility, and they were making a metric ton of money as well from sharing their space. And so their whole team got together and they were talking with our support team, and they were like, hey, do you guys have any protocols or anything that you guys do if a church wants to kind of change everything and kind of make this their main thing? And we started asking questions like, what are you talking about? And they're like, we're able to impact so many people now, and we're making so much money that we're not even going to meet on Sunday mornings anymore. We're going to shift this. We're going to rent out our building on Sunday morning, do our services at a different time, and then share our space with our community. And so it just changed kind of their entire dynamic, and they're still rocking and rolling in Arizona and doing really, really well. And then we actually had another testimony come through that was really cool. We wouldn't have even have known about this, but one of my employees' mothers runs a nonprofit where they take people to Israel and they do all these different kinds of things. Well, they were hosting a conference from one of their partners, and I think they were in South Dakota somewhere. So they're up there in South Dakota, and they're doing this little ministry time, and the pastor of the church gets up and they're like, before we go into this time of testimony, I just want to share a testimony with you guys about this building that you're sitting in and the ability that we have to have this conference. She said, we'd been looking for a building for 2 years and we had not been able to find one. We couldn't either get the money together to buy what we wanted or X, Y, and Z. Just things were not happening. And then I got onto this site called Space Together, and the Lord kind of led me to this particular building. We apply, we get in, we start sharing space with them. And it turned out that the church was kind of one of these that was more prominent at one time. They no longer had a pastor, and they had just kind of a rapidly aging group, and they weren't able to really keep up with the building. It was paid off, so they didn't have a ton of payments or anything, but they just weren't really having much impact. So they turned to Space Together to start kind of having some life back in the building, some things to happen. Well, this lady finds them, comes in, starts renting space with them, gets to know the people. They end up selling the building to her. And then so she now had the building that she had been looking for. It was a perfect situation. The people from the previous church just began attending their church and going to their services. Mm-hmm. And then they began to rent their space out to other people in a similar way in their community. And so she gets up and gives this whole testimony. And then my friend's mom was like, my son works for that company. That's absolutely crazy. And so, and we have all sorts of stories in between from a bunch of different connections and people that have happened, charter schools that have made awesome connections and really cool different stories, but those are just some of my favorites to share.
All right. So you told me some good stuff. Tell me a disaster. Tell me something that somebody tried this and it just did not work.
We've been really fortunate in that we haven't had, situations where people have come in and spray painted the walls or nothing like that has ever happened. Thank God. What we've seen that is, I would, is almost just as hurtful is just, there is a massive amount of infrastructure that goes into sharing your space.
Yes.
So the idea of it sounds really simple. You're not using your building, so just open your doors and let somebody come in.
Yep.
We had a conversation with one of the largest denominations in the United States about 3 years ago, and we're talking to them about coming on as an enterprise partner. And they told us that when churches in their organization, which thousands and thousands across the nation, when they started sharing their space, they had an average of 67% default rate. And I know exactly why that is. And it's 100% because you don't have the proper infrastructure. And what ends up happening is churches will say there is no problem. Everything's fine. Everything's okay. There is no problem with our finances. There is no problem with our building. There is no problem. There is no problem. We're all good. Everything's fine. And then it gets to the place where we're in crisis mode and we've got 3 months to figure something out. So we've either got to have this donor that we've never ever had come in the building, or we've got to figure out a way to increase the amount of money that we're making out of thin air, or we're done. And when you're in a denomination, this is hurtful, but it's really, really hurtful when it's somebody that's independent that just started doing this and because they had a call from God and they wanted to impact their community. And now they're personally guaranteed on a lease and they have a loan payment for all the equipment that they've taken out and all the other things. And they've got 3 months and they've got to figure it out. Yeah. And, we've definitely come in and tried to help some people, but the disaster stories more come from, man, this just, we didn't get out ahead of this far enough.
They waited too late.
Or they started trying to do it too quickly.
Yeah.
And they ended up getting into agreements with people that just were terrible. Like we knew one lady, it was a really, really sad story, but her and her husband left a really, really large church. If I said the name of it, many people would understand this. It was before kind of one of those big falls happened, and they kind of were whistleblowers, so they got excommunicated, And so them and another group of people, they go out and they start this, big, it was like a coffee shop church combo thing that they were doing. And right after they get started, she had a traumatic brain injury. And so now her husband is trying to run the coffee shop and do the thing, plus work his job. And it just ended up being too much. She really makes a pretty miraculous recovery from her brain injury, starts getting back involved with everything. And her husband is diagnosed with cancer. And so now they're going through, and it's just kind of one thing after another for this couple. Then her husband ended up getting diagnosed with Gulf War syndrome. And there was just all these things that were happening. Well, because of all that, the building just kind of just continued to decline. And they were, $15,000, $20,000 behind on their rent payments. They hadn't been able to make any of their loan payments for the equipment that they took out in the beginning. And so they start renting their space with people off of our platform. So they were just doing this on their own through Craigslist and some other things. And by the time that we got involved, they had 4 or 5 tenants in there that were just 100% taking advantage of this woman, because they knew that if she didn't have them, she wasn't able to pay her bills and keep the lights on. And so eventually the equipment starts failing. And so now you got to figure out a way to provide new equipment, or the people that are renting from you can't use the building. And so now you're in this huge struggle, but you don't have any money. So then one of your tenants says, oh, this is no problem. Let's just put up my sound system and everybody can use that. We don't mind. But now that is their building.
Yes.
And they're in complete control of everything that's happening. And they're in control of your destiny, not just your organizations, but and so that's the disaster stories that we've seen is just where people were in a frantic survival mode and they just started making deals with people that they shouldn't have made deals with. And, that was also, that was really early on when we started doing this. And we just said, man, this is 100% avoidable.
Yep.
This is something that we could have had some infrastructure around, and this would have never happened.
Well, there's in Proverbs, it says that a prudent man sees danger and takes cover. The reason I wanted you on today to have this conversation is because some people are like, what's this all about? Well, for some of our listeners right now, for some of our pastors, some of our churches, if you look into the future right now, based on your giving, on the aging of your church, on the way things, you're going to have to come up with something to help sustain your ministry moving forward. Well, I don't want you to wait and get in the situation that we just described, where you're doing something out of panic, or you're behind, or you're putting you're pressured into a deadline. I want you to be able to think through. And so here's the thing: Justin's going to give me some any kind of links or that would help be helpful. We'll include those in the show notes. And it may be that you're in a situation, you're in a town where your facility, you got the insurance and everything in place to pull this off. You got to do it right, got to do it legal. But it's possible you might be in a place to where you could. This could be an answer to a prayer for you. And so I wanted you to meet Justin. Again, I'm going to have all his connections in the show notes, but this is an opportunity for you to maybe find another way to create revenue or income streams for your church. And so, Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today. I really appreciate it. I love your heart, and I love meeting someone who basically, you're like an Old Testament character. You're just like the Lord just called you out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's true, man.
You're a little Abrahamish.
I appreciate that, man.
It's so good to meet you. And like I said, we'll connect folks to you, but I just pray God will continue to use what you're doing, and it'll help churches because it'll help them get involved in the community. It'll help them financially. It can just be a win-win if it's done right, but we don't want you jumping into this, but Justin can help guide you. So, man, thanks for taking the time to join me today.
Absolutely, Dale. Thank you so much for having me. Guys, I just want to say to everybody out there, especially if you're, in a church of 30 people or 20 people, and you're just looking at this like, man, does any of this matter? It 100% matters. It matters to the people in your community. I know certainly for me, there was definitely days where, you have 10 people show up for service and you're like, why in the world am I even doing this? And I just want you guys to know that you are absolute heroes. You are making a huge difference. And there is no way that I exist without the help of small church pastors and people that just truly cared about what they were doing in their community and for the individuals that came through their doors. So I just want to encourage everybody in 95 Network. Thank you so much for being who you are and out there doing what you're doing. And definitely keep up the work. And if there's anything that we can do to help you in that and keep everything rolling, we would love to do that. So definitely part of my tribe, guys, and thankful to have some time with you.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely, Dale. Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.